Today's briefing, which will then become a hearing, and it's just due to technical regulations prescribed by the committee and by the House, to hear from an ambassador cannot be done in a hearing setting, but it is a briefing. It's really a distinction without a difference. So today's briefing is one that deserves the world's attention: the systematic abuse of human rights in North Korea, which amount to crimes against humanity by perhaps the world's most repressive totalitarian regime. And so, very correctly, as stated in the United Nations Commission on Inquiry report on North Korea, such a regime is a state that does not content itself with ensuring the authoritarian rule of a small group of people, but seeks to dominate every aspect of its citizens' lives and terrorizes them from within. So it's, by definition, this is not an authoritarian regime, it's an absolute dictatorship and totalitarian regime. For in the People's Republic of Korea, we see, Democratic People's Republic of Korea, we see a state that seeks to control all aspects of the lives of its citizens, not only their political lives, but also that innermost sanctuary that we call conscience as well. The term hermit kingdom is applied to any nation that willfully cuts itself off from the rest of the world, either metaphorically or physically. This term was applied to Korea so long ago as the late 19th century, but it continues to be applicable to North Korea today. This is why the terrible human rights violations in North Korea are little noticed outside of foreign policy circles. We must see that the crimes of the North Korean regime are far more widely known and combated and raised and pushed against than they currently are now. The first step towards that one is what we're trying to do here today, to call in experts to present testimony on the horrific situation in North Korea, where political prisoners serve as virtual slaves, where starvation is used as a political weapon, and where religious believers, Christians in particular, are imprisoned, tortured, and killed with such ferocity that some say it amounts to genocide. In the past, and this is probably, I think, the 6th or 7th hearing that I've had on human rights in North Korea, or the lack of them, we have heard from people, especially women who had been trafficked, had made their way into China, and then were sent back, involuntarily repatriated by the Chinese government, only to be sent to a gulag where they were tortured and in many cases executed for leaving the country. So seeking to gain some liberty, they ended up first being sex trafficked and then secondly exterminated and killed by a barbaric regime. Unfortunately, today's world attention is distracted by manifold crises which seem almost to overwhelm us. To enumerate just a few: breathtaking collapse in progress of the Maliki regime in Iraq, which we had supported at the cost of so much American blood and treasure; various humanitarian catastrophes in Africa, most notably in the Central African Republic and South Sudan, which was the subject of a resolution passed just a few minutes ago; but also the presence of violent Islamist movements such as Boko Haram. I was just in Nigeria and saw the devastating impacts, again, of what that terrorist organization does to innocent people, and of course Al-Shabaab in the major nations of Nigeria and Kenya, where they've been hitting, and most recently in Kenya, by that organization. The ongoing tensions in Ukraine, as a rest of Russia seeks to reassert the imperial hegemony over neighboring states, and clashes in the South China Sea as an increasingly bellicose China makes a gambit to become a maritime power and fill a perceived vacuum. We have always lived in a wounded world, but today the tourniquets required to stop all the bleeding the world over would tax even the most compassionate of souls. Yet it is precisely this exhaustion of compassion that we must fight against. Compassion fatigue is not a luxury that we can afford, and we must summon the necessary conviction to address the sufferings of the beleaguered people of North Korea. We will have testifying today an eyewitness to the barbarity of North Korea's cruel regime, a defector from North Korea who was born in a total control zone, political prison camp in the north, and who will give us an unsettling first-hand account of exactly what he experienced. The torture he endured, and not simply physical torture, as horrific as that was, but was a psychological barbarity and such ruthlessness that once you have heard what he underwent, your imaginations will forever be affected. Members of this subcommittee are no strangers to the brutality of starvation in many parts of the world, particularly in Africa. But today they will hear stories of starvation by design, how the denial of food is used as an instrument of wide-scale torture. We will also hear about a North Korean nuclear program that goes beyond the headlines. Yet we do know that North Korea, in its quest for nuclear weapons, threatens to destabilize the world. But what many of us did not know, and what we will hear today, is the extent to which the North Korean nuclear program is built upon the cadavers of its own people. The United Nations Commission of Inquiry report, as important as it was, never explored the full extent to which workers in uranium mines are exposed to high levels of radiation, and how even the most basic concern for the safety needs of workers are routinely ignored. Finally, I want to call attention to H.R. 1771, the North Korea Sanctions Enforcement Act. It is my hope that Congress, both House and Senate, will take to heart the testimony that is presented today, and with a renewed focus on North Korean human rights record, pass this important legislation which takes a step toward holding this rogue regime accountable for the sins committed against its own people. I finally just note parenthetically that we did invite Ambassador at Large Bob King. He is traveling. We will have him here as our Ambassador at Large to North Korea. His position was created as part of the North Korean Human Rights Act, and we look forward to his testimony because he has worked very, very hard. And I would just also remind my colleagues who were here, he used to be the Chief of Staff for the Democrat side of the aisle for the Foreign Affairs Committee under Tom Lantos. So I yield to Ms. Bass.